Hi, I'm John Feldt. Welcome to the Texas and Southern U.S. edition of the Weekly Water Outlook, recorded on March 17th, 2013. Well, I mentioned it'd be a very quiet week across the region last week, and indeed it was. If you liked pleasant weather, it was very nice. I was in Oklahoma myself, and it was beautiful, and I enjoyed my stay. But if you need rain, like everybody told me, and most of the region needs a lot more rain, you certainly didn't get it except for a very limited part of far eastern Texas and Oklahoma. Much of Arkansas received a fairly steady rain, and just about half of the state of Kansas. But as you can see here, almost all of Oklahoma and Texas, little or no rain over the week. Thus, percentage of normal rainfall was well below normal, 25% or less of normal over almost the entire region. No snow to report of. I wanted to show you the snow. There's not a whole lot of change. It's being held in check in the very far northern plains. A bit of snow on the ground still over the far part of Kansas, and that should melt fairly soon as it's not all that extensive. I wanted to take a peek at stream flow across the area. This is a 7-day average stream flow, and green is normal stream flow. Browns are shades of below normal stream flow. Just wanted to point out that due to these long-term persistent drought and rainfall, lack of rainfall, as you might suspect, stream flow is either below or well below normal over most of the area. Now, parts of eastern Oklahoma had a bit of recharge and stream flow is still normal, but I think that's going to dip down again below normal very soon if more significant rain is not fall in that area. So taking a quick look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, the trend across Oklahoma and Texas is still droughty. We still have pockets of very significant, extreme, and exceptional drought. The current drought of D0 to D4 is about 63.64%. Hasn't changed much from last week, but it has come down a bit from 3 months ago where it was 81%. Now keep in mind that over the winter months, you almost always get some improvement. So I think the fact that it went from 81 to 63 and that D3 and D4 went from about 31% to 19%, I don't think that's as much saying that there's going to be an end to any drought anytime soon. It's just showing that we're getting into that typical winter recharge of rain and snow. So I wouldn't read too much into that, but at least there has been a bit of an improvement over the very recent past. As far as calculated soil moisture anomalies, wanted to point out here that we definitely see a bit of an improvement over Oklahoma and Kansas due to some recent rain and snow, but soil moisture anomalies are below normal over Texas. I want to also point out, take a look at this week, the difference between short-term drought indicators and long-term. These work together. Short-term are parameters that can change fairly quickly if precipitation would commence, and that might be some upper soil moisture and some of the smaller tributaries, some of the smaller ponds perhaps. And what we're seeing is because these short-term indicators have become somewhat positive over parts of the northwest part of Texas and Oklahoma due to the recent snowfall, you can see that from a short-term perspective, there has been some improvement. Soil moisture has improved a bit. Perhaps there was a bit more runoff, not likely a whole lot. But over the southern part of Texas and most of the region, you can see it's still below normal. However, I think it's more telling looking at the longer-term drought indicator blends. This shows that despite some short-term improvement, the long-term trends are still below normal, well below normal in many cases. And until we get this below, this lower soil moisture situation remedied by persistently normal or above normal rainfall, we're going to continue to have long-term drought deficits over most of the area. So what does that mean? That means any rain that does fall, or snow, is going to percolate into the lower soils faster, and those upper soils will dry out quicker. We're also going to reduce the amount and the potential for runoff into smaller ponds and streams, and also reduce the amount of runoff into area reservoirs. So when we're looking at any improvement of drought, it's very important both to look at short-term and long-term, upper soil and lower soil, because the lower soil is going to have some influence on the upper soil, and they work together, and that's going to be very important, especially as we get into the hot summer months. Now, Taking a quick look at the Arctic Oscillation, I did want to point out it's going to be very interesting over the next week or so. The Arctic Oscillation, which has been negative most of the winter, is forecast to go to the most negative readings so far this winter. That's that green line there. You can see the red is the forecast. And it's going to give us overall a very stable type pattern. That cold air will sink into the upper Midwest and the eastern U.S. This is generally a quiet type pattern for parts of the southern U.S. So it looks like overall the quiet weather and the below normal precipitation is going to continue for most of the region. So the big picture, this is the jet stream pattern later this week, and this is going to be somewhat of a stable pattern. There will be some embedded energy in here, and that could very well brush across Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas. That's that pattern we've seen, and then into the southeast U.S. The blue dashed lines are negative anomalies, so it's going to be colder than normal, lower than normal pressure, and this is the jet stream in green, the pattern. That's that negative AO pattern, and that's going to persist not just this week, but most likely through the rest of the month. In fact, if I look at the 6 to 10 day pattern, you see very little change, and that does look like it's going to continue into early April with this overall low pressure over the eastern U.S. and a bit above normal pressures over the western U.S. Now what that tends to do is tighten up this thermal gradient. I've mentioned that recently, and between the cold air up over the northern plains and the lingering warm air along the Gulf Coast, that's the track where you can get some enhanced precipitation. Now right now the energy looks like it's going to be fairly weak, so I don't really expect any significant rain or snow over the south, but there will be some modest amounts early this week. Now these are the tracks of the surface lows, and again they are mainly to the north, but they will be brushing parts of Oklahoma as that first low develops and moves off to the northeast. That will bring a chance of some rain and maybe even a few storms. So here's the forecast for the next 7 days. It does look like that track of upper energy and that surface low will produce around an inch of rain, maybe some isolated heavier amounts over smaller parts of Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, and then more widespread parts of Louisiana and Arkansas. Unfortunately, the areas that really need that rain, it's going to taper off very quick. Look at this tight gradient of rain here. With more significant rain, it goes from an inch of rain to 0 over a very short period of time. That's a track we've seen now for quite some time, and it looks like that's going to continue. In fact, if I look at the longer-term trends towards the end of the medium-range model into early April, I really don't see much of a change at all. This looks like a fairly static pattern. The rain in purple there that you see, that's this early event, and no rain is added after that, so it looks like it's going to be very quiet overall after this first rain event, and not a whole lot of rain over the region. Now this area of red down here, I think this is an outlier right now. Unless I see more of that, I don't really think you need to look at that too much for a chance of rain. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing: there will be a rain event early, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and even some precipitation in the form of snow and some freezing rain over the far northern areas. Then it looks like it's going to be very quiet and a stable pattern. Overall, it looks like continuing losing ground, and the drought looks like it's going to persist with rainfall deficits, especially over southern parts of the area. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Weekly Water Outlook. I will be updating this again next Sunday.